Hello and welcome to Supercharged, episode 196. I'm Adam Dotchis.
And I'm Tommy Hutton.
And today we are joined by Eric Schweikardt, who is the founder and CEO of Modular Robotics. Eric, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm pretty good. Maybe upon reflection, I'm sort of yellow on the stoplight scale today.
Okay.
You know, politics, national news, and everything like that. But in general, I'm pretty good, thanks.
We'll approach with caution then.
I think we're all. I like that analogy. I think we're all a little in that department today. Tommy and I are a little tired.
Yeah.
And as you know, having talked to me prior to recording, I'm a little all over the place. But we will. Fortunately, you're here to talk more than I am. So, first of all, I guess we talked a little bit about the reason you're. I found a product you made called Cubelets and got them for my partner's nephew for Christmas. He really loved them. I really loved them. That's a lot to go on, so maybe we'll just start with, aside from what I already said, what is modular robotics?
Great. Well, thanks for the kind words, and I'm glad you enjoyed playing with Cubelets. Modular robotics is actually kind of the name of an academic field. When I went to grad school, I started studying a little bit of robotics and got really excited about this whole class of robot systems made out of lots and lots and lots of little tiny robots. Mm-hmm. A number of reasons I think that's way cooler than just a big single purpose robot. And that whole field is called modular robotics. And it's sort of strange. The field's been around for 45-ish years, going back to lots of old research at Xerox PARC. And people have been building these systems made of lots and lots of tiny robots for a long time and writing academic papers, conference papers, journal papers. And every single one of those papers has a section just above the conclusion called applications. And every single one of those hundreds of papers for the last 45 years has had an applications paragraph that reads something like, clearly there's a wonderful technological advance and reliability and versatility, et cetera, et cetera. We're not quite sure where this technology might be used, maybe in space. And, it's sort of this like unrealized technological promise. And with Cubelets, when we invented them, we finally commercialized a product made out of lots and lots of little tiny robots. And since we were the first to do it, we sort of unabashedly stole the entire name of the academic field for our company name.
That's pretty cool, though. I mean, it's a good name. So you should, if it's not being used for anything practical, might as well.
Thanks. Another purpose of the name is to present a little bit of a playful dichotomy. I mean, we make robot toys for kids, which are typically cutesy and Reggie Viv colors and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I like the notion of those various products coming from something of a faceless corporation like a General Dynamics, sort of like blacked out giant office building where all the secret R&D is being done. Mm-hmm. But then colorful things like Cubelets come out the other end.
Yeah.
What are they plotting? Just like the Furbies. I always thought the Furbies were plotting something.
Well, they were.
Yeah, that's true. But I'm intrigued. So yeah, coming at this from the angle of going from, it's not just a tech company doing robotics, but also one that's marketed to kids and to young people. How do you then streamline that process of making it accessible?
So that's a great question. And maybe I would think back to some open sourcey stuff. So the accessibility around Cubelets, I think, has to do with abstracting away some hard stuff. And, for a number of years, we struggled a little bit. Many of my colleagues, friends have open source software companies or open source hardware companies like SparkFun, places like that. And for the first few years of modular robotics and Cubelets, we struggled a little bit, not with licensing around open source, but around the ethos. So where you have lots of these great open source companies, Arduinos and things that are exposing the guts and encouraging kids to remix and rebuild, take things apart and put them back together. Cubelets, on the other hand, we're taking all of this complicated hardware and software stuff and wrapping it in literal little black plastic boxes. Sort of goes against the ethos. But we've come to sort of realize that that's the power of a good construction kit. So, if you think about Lego or something, a great construction kit, Lego abstracts away joinery so that kids can put stuff together without having to worry about fiddly screws or bolts or connections. And that's what we're trying to do with modular robotics, is abstract away kind of the inaccessible layers of programming, electronics, so that kids can get exposure to computational ideas, to robotics ideas, before they learn those things.
The gateway drug, so to speak.
Sorry?
The gateway drug, so to speak. This is a way to show them what it can do before getting into the guts of having to actually, it's like being able to drive a safe little car without actually having to know how cars work yet, but you introduce them to the concept.
Yeah, definitely. And it turns out that that's a really, really powerful thing for getting girls, underrepresented minorities, populations who don't typically pursue STEM careers at the rates that white and Asian males do. It's a great way to give them early wins. And that's the one thing that's been shown to increase broad participation in STEM careers is early wins. So we do everything we can to give little kids kind of wins in technological areas before they self-select out of those areas as careers or passions.
That was actually kind of so my partner's nephew Nico, he's in a family that does not know anything about, well, I shouldn't say doesn't know anything, isn't really into science, math, technology, or anything like that. His mom was really glad that he could geek out with me because she doesn't know what he's talking about half the time. And I realized that he maybe doesn't have much of an outlet for this, and he's really smart, and he should, someone's got to encourage him. So I don't know how much of that happens when I'm not around, which is most of the time. I think he has a loving family, and they want to see him do well. However, I don't know if he has the resources all the time to do that, and so that was kind of my goal with getting something like this, or whenever I get him a gift, I'm I want this to be fun, but I want him to be able to also feel empowered to go out and do what generally speaking, he's Hispanic, so that's not always a career that, especially in the part of the city that he's from, I don't think he's getting as much of that as he should be, as the opportunity is just not always there, and I want it to be there for him if he wants it. So
yeah, certainly. Well, it's great of you to get him some stuff and to spend some time with him. I think sometimes, to create a huge change, sometimes even one simple product or one simple experience in a kid's lifetime can cause a meaningful change in worldview. So I wouldn't discount your efforts, even though you can't be there all the time.
Yeah, I hope so. And I'm glad that you and others are making stuff like this, so that I don't know what I would be doing if it were me and I was growing up. And I would just, the accessibility of technology when I was a kid was quite difficult, and that was, it was much worse before that. But I was very lucky to be able to have computers, and they were just so expensive then. I guess they're kind of expensive now, but inflation happened and prices didn't exactly go up. So it's computers are cheaper. I was thinking how much laptops used to be, and I think those PowerBook G3, which I guess is going to be more expensive than the average laptop at the time, because since it's Apple, that was what were there's $3,500.
Yeah, those
were a lot. Oh, okay. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, things are still expensive, so
yeah.
It's great that you could get Cubelets for your partner's nephew. A lot of people can't. We sell about 94% of Cubelets into schools, formal education institutions, libraries, summer camps, places like that. The number of individuals and consumers that just go out and buy our stuff is really vanishingly small. Our stuff is expensive. It's at least $100 and some to get started, and when we got started, that was no problem for the alpha geeks and the boing boing readers and people that supported us. But it's certainly a bit of a staircase to climb for most of the public. At the same time, in thinking about how one little toy can change things for us. A colleague and I were just talking this morning about the Play-Doh pasta extruding machine.
Oh yeah.
That we had as kids, and the hypothesis was that, if you get started early with the intuitions that you can have a 2D shape, and then you can turn a crank and you can push pasta through that, or Play-Doh through that 2D shape, and get an extrusion coming out the end. The hypothesis was that if you've played with that as a kid, you're probably much more apt to understand the 3D modeling software than somebody who's never thought about extruding 2D shapes into 3D. And I was just looking at that product on Amazon, and it's $4.94 for the big plastic Play-Doh pasta extruding machine.
I don't think I ever had one of those, but I had Play-Doh, and I used to make stuff out of it, and I wanted to keep it, so my mom got me some Sculpey clay, and when she got a new pasta maker, she was going to throw out the other one. I was like, no, I want that, and I used to put the clay through the pasta, and I would make miniature foods out of it, and then put them in the oven, cook like these little figures, and then sell them at school.
Very nice.
When I got into 3D printing, I never thought about that though, which is really weird because I guess I don't know whether or not it did have an impact, but I never made that connection before, which is really strange to me because that was like 2 years of my life. I hadn't thought about it until you just brought that up.
Try watching somebody who has no experience in that space try and construct a 3D object. I mean, you probably defaulted to creating 2D shapes, extruding them back and forth, combining them, doing Boolean operations to join them or union them or whatever you're going to do. People who don't think about shapes in terms of extrusions and profiles and different views just have no idea what to do or how to describe a 3D object.
Well, it's funny how certain places of play and certain toys, there's a huge impact on the idea of just growing up and learning about, I was a huge fan of learning about like evolutionary biology and psychology in college. And it was really fascinating to see the idea of this period of familiarity where it's almost like a priming period or imprinting period. Mm-hmm. And I worked with animals for a while, and seeing that, obviously it's a much shorter scale because their lifespans are shorter than ours. But learning about how humans have this imprinting period, and the more concepts that are abstract especially, you can introduce early on. Even if they're just little tactile things, like you said, with an extruder, which I had, and you had different shapes. So you could adjust and have it be a star or a circle or whatever. But that extrusion tool, yeah, you're right, it's like a $4 piece of plastic that you probably make for 10 cents overseas. Mm-hmm. But yet, like you said, those concepts, as soon as you introduce them early, the brain is able to build around them and just start creating these interesting foundations. So... yeah. I'm intrigued. Yeah, so tell us do you remember some of the foundations you had? Because clearly this is a space that you ended up studying in school, that you pursued. Why do you think got you to that point?
Oh, yeah, sure. My backstory is kind of one thing, and maybe I'll get back there in a second. But, I mean, you're speaking my language about how toys can just really shape the way that we think about the world. I remember vividly in high school taking physics for the first time, and it all made sense, and I'm pretty sure it was because of playing with Lego as a little kid. Mm-hmm. When you play with a bunch of Lego as a little kid, you're not learning any physics, but you're gaining these intuitions about shape and structure and balance and form and friction and, all of these things. You know what's going to happen. I remember getting to physics in high school and seeing some equations on the board and thinking like, oh yeah, this all makes sense. Here's the math describing all of the things that I'm really familiar with. Mm. And then looking around at other kids who maybe didn't have that sort of like physical Lego building construction experience as a kid, and just seeing their heads explode, seeing their eyes glaze over. So, in not so many words, that's exactly what we're trying to do with Cubelets. We're not trying to teach kids complexity science and emergence per se and all of these PhD level sort of concepts, but we're trying to give them intuitions about those things so that when they build complex systems and when they play with multi-robot systems and they see patterns emerging and they see how changing one little element can have ripple effects and change the behavior of their whole construction, that later on when they see complex systems in the world like political systems or environmental systems or ecologies or something like that, they'll have some intuitions about how they work, and they won't result to they won't resort to these oversimplified explanations that we see in the news and on Twitter and pop culture today.
Yeah, it's funny to hear physics, because I feel like what you're talking about kind of happened to me like 2 years ago, and it was very exciting for me to kind of have this like math and science awakening that I had never had before. But I was also kind of sad, and when I was thinking back to high school, and also thinking back to high school, and I was so bored with math. I basically got through it as quickly as possible. I really liked algebra, but I finished it early, and they put me in pre-calculus, which I hated, and I vowed never to do calculus again. And then I found out, like, maybe a year ago, maybe a little less than that, calculus, I use that all the time. And I just haven't realized. YouTube kept recommending this calculus video to me for months and months and months, and I finally relented, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. Why didn't I not learn it this way in high school? I hope that this helps kids get more interested in actually learning some of this stuff, because it is amazing. I think people don't realize how amazing science can be because it's taught in such a dry way, and I think it would help a lot if we changed that. But probably more easy to, I guess, if the toys that we play with when we're younger give us that intuition and give us that connection with it in advance, then we don't have to rely on being taught in a certain way that gets us excited.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I'm not worried about the kids who are self-motivated into robotics. The kids who are self-motivated and are going to join First Robotics, and they're going to be fine. There are plenty of resources for those kids to advance and learn everything that they want to learn. The world is flat here in 2018. They can just learn to no end. I mean, we're worried about the 98% of kids that don't self-select that path, and just trying to expose them to these things in pleasant, engaging, accessible ways.
So I realize we actually haven't really described what Cubelets are specifically. And then you also have a couple of other products I've seen, which are, I think you sell a couple of them still, but I remember going on Amazon and finding all these other things that maybe you used to make. So before we keep going with all this other stuff, what are Cubelets, and what are some of the other things that you create?
Yeah, definitely. Cubelets are robot blocks. So let's see. For listeners who don't have the internet in front of them, they're 40 millimeters. That's somewhere a little less than a couple inches on the side. Little plastic cubes with magnetic connectors on each face. So it's a building set. That's a construction kit. And kids snap a bunch of different blocks together to create robots that can do all sorts of different things. There are a variety of different Cubelets, different robot blocks. They come in sets. They come individually. And we sort of categorize them in terms of sensing blocks, the inputs, like our senses, thinking blocks, the processing blocks, like our nervous system, and then action blocks, the output blocks, like our arms and legs and voice. And that taxonomy sort of goes in line with our definition of what's a robot. And the short answer is it's any machine that senses, thinks, and acts. Maybe sense and plan and act for the less provocative version. But kids get a set of Cubelets, typically in schools, museums, science centers, snap them together, build little robots that drive around the table, chase after red things, stop before they fall off the edge, all before they learn about programming or electronics or any of these typical things that act as barriers to being able to learn about robots by building them.
Have you guys gotten them into the Exploratorium in San Francisco yet? Because I haven't been there in a while, but that's like my favorite place.
That's a great question, Adam. It's like my favorite place too. I haven't been in probably 10 years. And
oh wow! No, you haven't been in 10 years. They reopened it. You got to go back.
On the pier, right?
Yeah.
Still?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, you have to go
I have
back.
some friends that are involved in producing some work there, and they're doing some really cool stuff right now.
Yeah, the Exploratorium is awesome. And I actually have no idea if Cubelets are in use in the Exploratorium as an exhibit or workshop or anything like that. But I hope they are.
Next time I go back.
Should be.
Yeah, they really should be. I mean, for those who are not familiar, listeners who are not familiar with the Exploratorium, it's actually, I'm not really sure how to describe it. I almost want to call it a science museum, but everything's really interactive. There's definitely plenty of science, but they have a whole section dedicated to psychology now, where you do all these interesting games with other people, and try to learn about how your brain works and how interacting with other people works based on how based on neuroscience and psychological study. So there are all those really interesting things, and I ended up going there. I got invited by Twilio back in the blogging days, and I almost didn't go because I knew I wasn't going to be able to cover it, but I happened to be on vacation, and I was in San Francisco anyway, so I was like, sure, just so you know, like, I can't get any coverage out of this. Like, they're not going to let me, but I'd really like to check it out. It sounds interesting. And we had to listen to a bunch of talks about like how great the Exploratorium was for 3 hours before I actually got to see it. And I was thinking, oh, I'm not going to like this. And then I've been a member, even though I don't live in San Francisco, for like the last 4 years. So it's really amazing. They installed a fog bridge when it opened. That was so cool that they don't do anymore. But they have a. I don't know what it used to be 10 years ago. Like, what kind of stuff did they have then?
It might have been a little more like a traditional science museum 10 years ago. There were lots of great exhibits. It was a little bit like the New York Hall of Science in my recollection. But you got me intrigued by Fog Bridge.
Yeah. Oh, I'll have to send you some pictures or a video or something if I can dig them up, because it doesn't go on anymore. But they have there's a toilet water fountain that's designed. I mean, it's clean, but it's designed to mess with you, see how you feel about drinking out of a toilet. There's this big light bulb where you put it over your head, and it just immerses you in colored lights that you can change on a dial outside of it, which is really relaxing and interesting. There's a mirror, like a 3D mirror that I guess you just kind of have to see. But there are all these things that you can do. There's co-op Pac-Man where everybody controlled a direction, but I think they changed it to Snake because maybe Namco was like, hey, no, we want to be assholes about this. So I don't know, but either way, it's they have a lot of really, really interesting stuff, and it's just every time I go to San Francisco, I try to make a stop there, as long as I can spend at least a few hours, because it's fun to play around with that stuff, and I think that's like kind of meditation for me. But getting back on topic, I think Cubelets would have a very good place there, because they have a lot of areas in the Exploratorium where there are building blocks and stuff. And so when you were talking about them being in museums and all of that, and science centers and so on, I hope that they have them. If they don't, I'm gonna just bring mine with and be like, why are these not here?
Sounds like I need to make a trip.
Yeah.
One of the kind of best ways that we've gotten a lot of interest in Cubelets over the last couple of years is through this traveling exhibit called Robot Revolution, and it was originally designed by MSI, the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, I think, or was it a Boston Museum of Science thing? Actually, I have no idea, but it's in this traveling exhit because museums
that's a great museum
design exhibits and then sort of shop them around and loan their exhibits to other museums, and they travel around the country. But it's a huge exhibit on robotics, history of robots, what is a robot, etc. And then at the very end, everybody leaves through these 16-foot by 16-foot tables with hundreds and hundreds of cubelets. It's sort of like, it's very much exit through the gift shop sort of thing. Came out of nowhere, but then has exposed thousands of kids to cubelets, which has been really nice for us.
I'm on their website. It looks very cool. I wish I had seen this. Is it? Oh, it's in Portland right now? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think it's in Portland right now. It was just in Denver last year. That's
great news, because I was planning on going to Portland in the next, I don't know, before the year's over. So I love when one of my favorite things about doing podcasts is when we have guests on the show is that I usually come back with something to do afterwards and discover some new stuff. It's always fun for me. Yeah, that's kind of crazy. So okay, so we've covered Cubelets though. What are some of the other products on there? Because I saw some maybe more complex seeming robots.
For us these days, it's pretty much all Cubelets. Back in 2014, 2013, we started work on a second product. And if I can digress into this little story for a minute, it's kind of been an interesting learning experience for us. Modular Robotics started with a lot of National Science Foundation grant money. In the beginning, just as I was getting out of grad school, we started to get quite a bit of money from the National Science Foundation to develop our technology because it had an educational bent and was maybe a little early for venture capital, etc. Fast forward to 2013, and I got an email that there was a supplementary program. If we hired a postdoc into our company, the National Science Foundation, in collaboration with ASEE, which is the American Society of Electrical Engineers, or Electrical and Electronics Engineers, or something like that, that they would pay this postdoc salary and health benefits for a couple of years. So we thought, oh, wow, wonderful, free employee, let's do that. I immediately thought of my old colleague, John Hiller, from the Cornell Computational Synthesis Lab, and called him, and we hired him, and he moved out to Boulder and got started. We thought back then that a smart thing to do would be to kind of ignore the product market fit that we were just starting to get with Cubelets and start off in a whole new direction. Why look a free employee in the mouth like a gift horse? Why not put them on something brand new, right? So we started to develop a new robot construction kit. We called it Moss. And then we ended up doing a Kickstarter to launch Moss. And we hit Kickstarter right at the inflection point in mid-2014 when it crossed the chasm from geeks to everyone. 86% of our Kickstarter backers were first-time Kickstarter backers.
That's big.
It's huge.
I think I know where this story is going.
Yeah. Well, it meant that a lot of our backers hadn't used the platform, didn't quite understand that it was a bit open-ended, and that they were backing a project and not pre-ordering.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of pressure. We felt a lot of pressure ourselves from all of the Kickstarter backers. And we ended up launching Moss too soon. It was our decision, but I think we pushed Moss out the door before it was perfect. And we ended up with like a sort of a B plus grade, maybe, product that fell apart a little bit too often. We had steel spheres with little magnetic plastic blocks, and you could build these really amazing constructions, but they weren't, sort of kid durable. You would pick them up and move them, and all those magnets would fall apart, and it would be a painstaking half an hour to build the construction again.
Yeah.
What a super interesting learning experience for us. We put Moss away pretty recently, kind of put it on the shelf. I'm not sure what the future holds with Moss. Fundamentally, it's this really neat primitive, right? There's spherical steel balls, and then
it looks really cool.
Yeah, it was fun to build. It looks really cool. It just had some usability problems, some buildability problems. And we're a company right now of 16 people. And we had either the resources, time, and energy to focus on kind of one product or another. So for now, it's all Cubelets for us all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's Cubelets are those are ones that if they fall apart a little bit when you're moving them around, it's not really a big deal because you just snap them back together. What
would you have done differently with Moss? Like, because obviously that was a big learning experience. Do you think was the timing just you would have taken more time, or do you think there were certain things you could have done differently from the just design standpoint?
Yes, to both of those. I think that we should have just gone through 3 or 4 more iterations on the design and play testing and taken the time to do that. We just rushed. We pushed it out the door before it was quite ready. With all of our products, everything that we do is basically because of 3D printing. We make what we make because we can draw something, send it to the printer, go and get a cup of coffee, and come back and see a prototype and put it in our hands and feel it and play with it.
That's a pretty fast turnaround for a product so you can iterate so much faster and fail, anyone in the design world knows, like fail fast, fail often.
Yeah, definitely. The only reason that Cubelets is here is because when I was in graduate school, one day, unannounced, the door to the lab was knocked on, and this delivery fellow came in, wheeled in this huge box, and said, "Here's your new Stratasys Dimension 1200 3D printer." And he wheeled it over and put it next to my desk. Everybody else in my lab was working on software, so it was sort of a mystery how we ended up with this machine. But with the machine next to me, I thought, oh, well, I'll fiddle around and make some hardware. I'm not an engineer. But with 3D printing tools and CAD tools, I was definitely motivated to just make some hardware in an hour, see what it feels like. Oh, it needs to be a little larger. This face needs to be a little smaller. This fillet should be a little rounder, and just iterate. If we were 20, 30 years ago, where to make physical products, you would need to send CAD away to a prototyping shop and wait 3 weeks for your product to come back. Cubelets would never even have gone from the idea phase into prototype, let alone product.
Yeah, I wish I were doing more 3D printing. I'm actually hoping to get back into it next month because I need to get a new printer. I was doing some 3D printing for an art show we put on a couple of years ago, and I got FlashForge Creator Pro, which worked really great to get everything we needed out, and then it just kind of crapped out right after the show was over, and I spent like a year trying to figure out how to fix it, and I never could, and I found a guy on Craigslist who wanted to buy it where it was, in the state that it was. Hopefully he got it to work. I tried everything, and I just probably too dumb at this point to have figured it out. But this is a little bit off topic. But if you were gonna buy a 3D printer, what would you recommend for someone who's just trying to jump in and learn it a little bit more?
Oh, that's a great question. I wish I had a better answer for you, because at Modular Robotics, we're fortunate enough to have an Objet two-head dual material 3D printer. It's, it's something like an $80,000 3D printer or something like that. But it can print rubber and it can print plastic all in one piece. So you can print a robot skeleton with ligaments and tendons and have a flexible, semi-rigid construction.
So you're saying you're one step away from Westworld.
Oh, it's amazing. I don't know the new Westworld. I left off at Yul Brynner back in the 80s, but yeah, I think we're probably close.
Which it's funny because in the show they show them printing the hosts, you see them, and obviously like the jets are able to print out like a flesh and bone and all sorts of things in one piece of material, which I find amusing. But it's cool just how the simple addition of being able to do two things in one can really elevate what you can do.
Yeah. I had a dual extruder, but you still had to snap it together. But I remember seeing one at SIGGRAPH where it was printing a shoe, and it wasn't, you weren't going to wear it, but it was a prototype for a shoe, but it was all different colors, and I was like, oh, that is something I'm not going to be able to afford, but that is amazing. But I've heard the Prusa is really great, and that one's not too expensive, and it sounds wonderful. So I think that's where I'm headed, but I'm scared to get something that I'm gonna have problems with again.
Yeah, I'm not as up on the technology. I haven't been to. Oops, are you still there?
Yep.
Oh, I got a little beep from my earpiece, so if I'm going to get disconnected, we'll just kind of figure that out when it happens.
Okay.
But back to what we were talking about, I haven't been to a Maker Faire in a few years, and last time I went, Maker Faire was just basically a 3D printer showcase. Lots and lots of booths of different small 3D printer companies printing plastic heads of their founders. I'm a huge MakerBot fan. Even with their interesting politics. And I also know that Lulzbot is making great FDM 3D printers these days, and they're a local Colorado company just down the street from us.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I've heard good things about that. It's kind of, there are a lot of printers that sound like they're really good. And you can usually find somebody championing at least one from any of them companies that have been doing it a while, so it was very hard for me to choose. I decided I wanted something with ABS because every time I would see a PLA print, I'm like, that's just not good enough. It always just looked like a little bit too rough to me. But the ABS ones, I guess, come out that way too. And it's I learned a lot about the smoothing techniques and everything. And so it was a situation where I would model we made like these fake candy bars and boxes and stuff, whatever you call them, because we were trying to make candy from the future, and so we were doing like a commemorative replica, I guess you could call it, and put them in bell jars, and so I did the 3D modeling, which was my first time, which it was fun to learn, and it was interesting when you were talking about the learning all of that stuff, the precursors to that earlier. I'm like, I wonder if that did help me, because sometimes I feel like I just know how to do stuff pretty easily and can figure it out, and I have a hard time understanding why it's confusing to other people, because it seems really straightforward to me. And I wonder if I just never noticed that like I had that education and it's just now coming into play. But
yeah, I doubt all that smarts came out of thin air.
Yeah, I mean, like, it just doesn't feel like smarts to me, though. It just kind of feels like
something you already know.
That just makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the best thing about intuitions, right? It just becomes common sense. It's something that you're used to.
Yeah, and it was great because I was able to I'm like not good at 3D modeling, but I was able to figure it out really quickly to make some candy and get that out into the printer, and then we screwed it up a lot. Eventually got those out. I figured out how to smooth things. Get the texture really nice, and then had Denise finish them off. She does like set makeup and sculpting, so this was kind of fell into her area of expertise a little bit, to paint, to do the coloring and the painting on them and stuff. And she finished everything, and they came out beautifully. So it was really, I miss doing that. I wish I had like I wish I had work that I had to do that would involve 3D printing. It's kind of hard if you're not like actually making a physical product most of the time, to come up with a reason to 3D print. But I want to get a replacement for the old printer to get back into that, because just every time I talk to somebody about it, every time it comes up, I'm just like, oh God, I miss that.
Well, here's a possible idea for you. Do you remember the Fab at Home project?
No, I don't, but...
It was an early open source 3D printer back when, we were at MakerBot #1, and it was a project out of Cornell, and Cornell's an interesting place because it's got a private and a public university all in one. So you have these like amazing research labs, one building away from the hospitality sciences building. But it leads to really interesting cross-pollination sometimes. So the Fab at Home project was this 3D printer, and it had these refillable hoppers and dispensers of different diameters. It also had regular old hot glue gun style PDF printers. But the Fab at Home crew did all of this cross-pollination with hospitality science and printed food. And some of the food that came out of the 3D printer was mind-boggling. My favorite was a cube of milk. They had added some carrageenan, some seaweed, some sort of thickener to the milk, and printed out this perfect cube of milk that then you could eat, and it tasted like milk, but it was in a cube.
Some molecular gastronomy stuff right there.
Yeah. I always wanted them to try and do that, that little pill from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory that's turkey on the outside, and then it's blueberry pie, and then it's pumpkin on the inside, but nobody thought that was a cool idea.
The complete meal in a pill, come on.
Well, that's probably...
For the busy executive on the go.
It's probably pretty hard. I think about that regularly, how it would just be nice during the day to not have to worry about food.
Okay, Soylent.
I'm actually seeing that right now through my window. We're subletting 400 square feet inside of our big cavernous warehouse right now to this startup called Robotics Materials. And it's this really cool spin-off from the University of Colorado. They're making these artificial fingers for the ends of robot arms that have different kind of multimodal sensing so that they can grasp really irregular objects and slick objects. using some of the intelligence that we actually have inside of our fingers and our motion control systems. And they're working on a video right now. 2 of their engineers just drink Soylent all day, every day. And there's a robot arm picking up empty cans of Soylent and throwing it in a recycling bin as we speak.
It's probably really passive aggressive to being like, oh, you guys can't clean up after yourself.
Yeah. I've
got to clean up everything around here.
I don't even really enjoy Soylent that much, but it's convenient. And the problem is I have to eat some solid food, otherwise my metabolism doesn't go, and I need it to function during the day. So I have to throw in a candy bar or something, some sort of actual solid food to work with it. Otherwise, it would be fantastic. But I would really rather just take a pill during the day and not have to eat.
It's funny how food, it definitely is a weird aspect of our culture where for me, it's like I find comfort in it. When I get stressed, I eat like crap.
Yeah. Oh, no, I love food. I just want to do it socially. When I'm working, I just don't want to have to eat.
For me, it's like I find my break time is when I am able to take time out and just eat and do something else like that. But what's funny is I've also trained myself that whenever I relax, I want to eat too. Mm-hmm. So it's like that's when I'll go for the crap. So I tried to train myself for breakfast to blend up veggies and get a giant heaping, cocktail of veggies. So I try to get back into that when I can, with a mixture of protein powder, veggies, veggie powder, green tea, all this crazy stuff. And I don't do it for taste. It does not taste good, but I'm trying to train myself that some meals are okay not to taste good. It's okay to do that. But yeah, I couldn't do the entire thing.
Mm-hmm.
The green tea is a good idea. My morning smoothies end up tasting like blue-green algae, and something like matcha thrown in there would be much more palatable.
Yeah, so I do matcha. I do a weird vegetable powder. I do spirulina with it, and then I do usually...
What is spirulina?
It's an algae.
Oh.
It's supposed to be a very healthy algae with very dark green algae. So I do that, and then I toss it. I try to do 5 veggies, 1 serving each. So this morning was tomatoes. I know, technically a fruit. Tomatoes, an orange, a bunch of carrots, some broccoli, and some kale.
Wow, what color does it end up?
It usually ends up being, I think it's because of the vegetable powder and the predominance of the kale and the broccoli. It usually ends up being a greenish color. And also the matcha. So I think just the green tends to regulate.
Or a nice green color, or baby poop green.
Like pistachio. I prefer not to see the poop side
smoothie.
of it. Yeah, I prefer to see the pistachio side of it.
I'm not sure either sounds more appetizing to me, but that's I'm fine with eating something that tastes like nothing, but if it I don't know, there's something about those green smoothies that I'm
it's definitely not
glad you can do it.
It's definitely not for taste. It does not taste pleasant. But I know it's good for me, and I'm like, okay, that works. And on top of it, I also blend the entire thing, so I don't peel, I don't cut, I do the entire thing.
There's this other you're getting your fiber then.
Yeah, I do. So I eat orange peel. I don't discard anything. I eat the whole thing.
I got to give you. My dad found out about me having Soylent, and he's like, "Oh, well, I drink Ample, which is more expensive and grosser, in my opinion. It's probably healthier for you too." But,
Ensure, right?
I sort of like the idea of Soylent meal in a little jar that you can just have on the go. But a couple of years ago, my girlfriend was in the hospital for a week with this really awful bicycle accident and had her jaw wired shut for 4 weeks after that. And the hospital recommended Ensure and all of these sort of protein powder-y shake supplements. And I would, share them with her in a show of solidarity. And
that's
after
very
that
kind
episode,
of you.
The notion of a vanilla-flavored protein shake is just pretty much unappealing.
It tastes like chalk, right?
It's a little chalky.
Like liquid chalk. Yeah.
I remember those from my dad's marathon days. They used to give us Ensure at the marathon, and then also at the 5Ks. And I was like, no, I'm good. I'm not going to eat or drink.
Yeah, you drink that shit when you have to.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, the idea of meal replacements and the idea of Soylent. Reading about I'm a huge person for microbiomes, and our gut health is interesting to me. And so the guy who created Soylent, the CEO, went on that big stunt where he only drank Soylent, but then after testing his gut biome, it was completely in horrible shape.
Yeah,
And-
I don't feel good drinking Soylent. I don't want to say anything bad about it, and I do still drink it, but it's like I can't have it all the time.
Well, yeah.
I can tell something's wrong.
Yeah, I know they advertise and say, like, after that whole thing came out, it's like, well, we're not a complete food replacement. Like, we're a supplement where
Well, they always did say that, though. They said, like, maybe 2 out of 3 meals.
Yeah, they really went overboard with their marketing to show, like, make sure you eat something.
Yeah. Yeah. It was about making... the reason, like, I was interested in it, and before they had Soylent in the first place, and the mixing it thing was never really great for me. But when you could just buy them ready to go, that was when I really got on board. But I started doing the DIY one. I did it as an experiment for Lifehacker because I wanted to do it to lose weight. It ended up actually helping me. I still have chronic migraines, but they're managed now. But it helped me get the frequency down from 24/7 to like twice a week. So when I just had Soylent for 2 weeks, it was I was like, okay, well, elimination diets sometimes help people figure out what's wrong. So I did that, and I felt much better, and it helped a lot in that regard. So thumbs up for Soylent for that. But
Indeed.
it's not. I feel tired and maybe a little bit sad if I have only Soylent during the day.
Well, your body's like, you're no longer natural, you're part of a robot. But it is intriguing, the idea of how obviously it came out of the Silicon Valley mindset of like life hack and, biohack and try to be your best self, nootropic life. But it does raise up the question of like how to be efficient. And so this is actually intriguing, coming at it from an engineer / creative / I don't know, electronic / family kid toy thing. Like, how do you manage your time? Because obviously you are lead designer, you have a bunch of products, you can keep innovating and iterating and testing. It's got to be, I'm curious how people manage their schedules and time, especially coming from a creative or like engineering background.
I'm kind of a weirdo, honestly. And I think maybe with Modular Robotics being in Boulder, Colorado, instead of the Bay Area, that my weirdo tendencies are encouraged. I'm not really all about productivity or efficiency or striving, I would say, nearly as much as I feel like everyone else on the internet sort of seems to be these days.
It's very data driven, like collect all the data and then improve.
Yeah, and it was weird too because that was like my life for 4 years. But towards the end of my time at Lifehacker, while I still definitely try to be, that sticks with me, and I think some of it matters. There was also a point where it's like, okay, well, it's fine, but not just to fit in more work. Like, it should be to improve the quality of life in a way that where it's about me being happy and not me just getting more and more stuff done. So I think
I guess it depends on the task, right? Often, sometimes we'll need to program something. Sometimes we'll have a list of tasks, we'll have deadlines, we'll have writing deadlines and things like that. And you just need to buckle down and be productive and be efficient. And it's great to have a set of tools and, a set of approaches to be able to do that really well and effectively. I'm a big 4-hour work week fan. I like introspection and thinking about those things, but I also know, I'm an ancient 41-year-old at this point, and I know that if I put in more than, say, 40-ish hours a week, that my productivity just tanks, that all of a sudden I can spend 8 hours watching YouTubes on calculus or something like that and never getting anything done. So I try really hard to sort of marshal my energy and marshal my resources so that I can be fully present in what I'm working on, even if it's not a whole shit ton of time spent working on that thing. And that treats me much better and helps me out with balance than for instance, when I was in grad school and drinking coffee 18 hours a day and just working.
So, well, how do you manage that? What do you do to get the most out of those 40 hours?
I'm really rigorous about charting out what's most important to do. So one of my habits is the Friday afternoon quadrant chart. And it's a little quadrant chart. It doesn't need to be quadrants. It can be kind of an open scale, however you want it. But on one axis is things that I like doing versus things that I don't like doing. And on the other axis is things that I'm good at and things that I'm not good at. And in a role like mine, which changes month to month as we grow and as everything changes, my job changes so much. So at least weekly, I'll go through and make a chart like this, look back at my week, think, what am I doing? What did I do? Put all of my meetings, appointments, tasks on this chart and figure out what I need to change for next week, whether that's making a hire to help out in some areas that are in the lower left quadrant, or, collaborating a little better with colleagues to do things that are in that quadrant, or carving out more time to work in the things that are in the upper right-hand quadrant. A lot of people probably don't have that luxury because their jobs are not as malleable as mine is, but I find that little chart a great way to get that stuff out of your head and help categorize where I'm spending my time and my energy and my focus.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah, it's still data tracking, but on a much more intuitive level, rather than just like looking at hard data, but also being honest with yourself, which I imagine you're able to do at this point.
I think so. I also realize that for my role, I can have an extremely valuable 10 minutes in the right place, in the right time, in the right mindset with focus. I can have an idea in 10 minutes that's more valuable than hundreds of hours slogging away on something where I'm being inefficient or doing something not so well.
That's one thing I took to really value was when I was in my old day job before doing what I do now, realizing the value of time, and not all time is created equal. The idea of good time when you have your good hours, when you're creative, when you're focused, when you have the ability to really operate at your peak level, and then when you should also learn to throw in the towel that like it's better to get sleep and work up refreshed and work on it the next day rather than stay up all night.
Yeah, I have a hard time with that one.
Doing crap, work that's pretty meaningless. And
it's not even that. Sometimes I just like don't want to stop, and it's 4 a.m. and then I have to tell myself, no, that this is gonna suck tomorrow at this point anyway. But you still gotta go to bed. Yeah, the work you're doing now is not really valuable, and on top of it, you're gonna sabotage tomorrow too. I don't find the work is usually all that bad. It's just it's more of like I don't want to feel tired tomorrow.
For me, it's like I'm learning from the creative side of it is certain hours are just, it almost is like a masturbatory thing where you're like, the work you're doing is just, it's being productive for the sake of being productive, not actually producing good work. And being able to be honest with myself and see like, oh wow, yeah, I realize my good hours are these times. So don't schedule meetings during these times, put the most important tasks these times. But again, that requires a lot of self-reflection and realizing your limitations and abilities.
Yeah.
It does, but it's worth it. I don't know if you guys think about working in the flow state, Csikszentmihalyi's flow or Rise of Superman flow or something like this. I mean, when I'm in the flow state, whether it's drawing, designing, coding, very rarely actually for two of those things, maybe a little more for the third one. In the flow state, I'm 100 times more productive than when I'm not. So I'm aware of that, and will do pretty much anything I can to encourage that state, which is easier said than done.
For me, I know the time of day I'm most flexible, and so again, I'm learning to carve out, and say no to meetings, no to anything else. Like this is when I work, and then I can schedule things outside of that. But yeah, it's learning your own individual programming and stuff. It's pretty fascinating once you actually discover it. It's like, oh yeah, follow this rule and you'll be good.
Yeah, my problem is it usually hits around like 10 p.m. But I've been lucky this week. I'm trying to figure out how I get it going earlier in the morning. Usually exercise helps, but then I have to start the day with exercise, which is not my favorite thing to do at 9 a.m. But it's not just because I'm tired and I woke up recently, but because then I get back later and I'm starting the workday later, and then my options are getting up earlier and feeling that's definitely not something that's going to work for me. Getting less sleep or losing a couple hours during the day. I don't know. There's just not enough time during the day, I think, is part of the problem for me. But I don't know. If you want to live a full life, you kind of can't do everything all the time.
Have you tried pushing it until it breaks? So continuing to work, stay in the flow state, stay up as late as you need to stay up, then get up early the next morning, and then eventually you'll break on one side or the other, and that might be an instructive breaking point.
Yeah, that happens sometimes. It's and then I start to worry I'm going to get in the habit of doing it though, because it will usually, like the last 3 days it's been like that, where I've been up till 4 a.m. working, and I let myself do it when I know that something good's coming out of it, and I've been producing like at the level that I want to. The work's just been really good, and I usually don't feel that way. So when that's happening, I'm like, okay. And I realize there are certain things like drawing when I start to get tired. I always like any of the drawing stuff, the illustration stuff I need to do. I save that for like when I'm losing steam. Because if I do that during the day, I got up this morning and started working on an illustration, and then I was like, crap, it's late already. I just drew for an hour. I should not have done that. But that's something I can do whenever. That's unless I'm watching a show with subtitles. That's
this sort of introspection and self-knowledge and structuring our days for best output, and I mean not just productivity but just presence and general satisfaction is super important. And I'm shocked every day at Modular Robotics. I work with this group of 16 hyper talented, amazing, motivated, great people at ModBot, and it's designed to be a place where we can all set our own schedules. It's typical modern, unlimited vacation, set your own hours, work from wherever you want, just, inform your team. Very, very, very loose. And everybody except me basically shows up Monday through Friday at 9 to 5.
It's so funny that routine,
it just baffles me.
It's almost like a weird social pressure. There's
also the fear of if you don't come in, what are people going to think? That was always
the social aspect
I didn't like about because at Lifehacker we had unlimited vacation, but part of the problem was that it wasn't real. It was kind of like if you took more, you knew you couldn't take more vacation. You also knew that if you went, then your work was going to be, everyone else was going to have to cover your work. So it was that environment, it did not work in because there was guilt around leaving. There was, you knew that there was kind of a cap on the vacation. It also had to be approved. And I think people are a little nervous about like losing their jobs sometimes, or getting reprimanded for not showing up enough. Which obviously, if someone decided not to come in for 6 months, you'd have to deal with that. But yeah, I don't know. I wonder if it's that, or people just really like the work that they're doing too, because.
I've dug into it a little bit at Modular Robotics, and I hope it's not a culture of passive-aggressive guilt and people worrying if they're going to lose their jobs if they come in at, from 10 to 7 or something like that. I think it mostly has to do with other people's schedules, partners, kids' school schedules, things like that. People aren't quite as free to pick out their own
warehouse
schedule.
may be a different schedule, but the rest of the world moves at the 9 to 5 pace.
Yeah, that's the other problem. It's like my schedule is very flexible technically, but trying to fit in meetings at the right time. I don't like to break up the flow, so I try to schedule meetings in the beginning of the day when I'm not really like all there anyway. And maybe not great for the meeting, but I usually I can make my notes in advance so I can just kind of go over it. I don't have to remember anything. But it's like. I don't like to break it up with that stuff, but everybody else is operating in those time frames.
Yeah.
And whereas I would rather, most of the stuff that I don't want to do, I'd rather kind of do it around like 5 p.m. and then everyone else is like, no, I'm done with the day. I can't do that. So it's tough when you operate in a different time frame.
It's also potentially nice when you operate with colleagues all over the world. So
yes,
I'm operating a lot lately with colleagues in China and colleagues in India, and their schedules, just figuring out that Venn diagram overlap when we can talk, makes for nice non-standard business hours.
I'm doing a project like now with Russia, so it's funny that I'm the same way, where it's like, okay, here are either it's super early or super late. Which is interesting. I'm curious for your perspective, since you're so deep embedded in the robotics world. So one popular topic of conversation that comes up over and over again is the ensuing, massive layoffs of people after the robots take our jobs.
Oh, good. I wanted to go in this direction, and we're almost out of time. So I'm
so
glad you just went there.
Curious where you think. It's actually really funny because I was driving along the freeway out here, and there was an advertisement that basically had a robotic arm, and it said "Hire me" on a billboard. And I took a photo and sent it to Adam, and was like,
oh yeah, that's why I was like, oh, didn't I see this somewhere?
It's like, oh yeah, they're already coming. Like they're taking out their own billboards. So I'm curious your thoughts on where that's sort of automation and robotic, services become more robust, even with the fingers being added now to pick up after lazy engineers. The ability for society to adapt as this sort of grows.
Yeah, that's a big one. Thanks for asking. I think it's a social problem. I think we're almost there. Everything is automated. Everything's becoming automated. The level of automation that we're seeing, even for like robo-advisors and finance and things like that, is sort of madness. One of my favorite stories in thinking about robotization and automation is visiting all of these contract manufacturers in China. When this was about 5 years ago, and we were evaluating a bunch of different manufacturers, and I spent 10 days in the Shenzhen area visiting all of these factories, and noticed that there were 3 tiers to the factories. There's the tier 3 dirt floor factory that usually has 5 people working every injection molding machine, somebody putting plastic in the hopper, somebody putting in metal bits to be overmolded, somebody else taking out the plastic and using a hairdryer to blow off the little white plastic flash that shows on the outside. People everywhere. The top tier factories, the Foxcons, the companies that make consumer electronic, there's nobody on the assembly floor. The lights are off. There's just this rhythmic, like buzz, click, whir of hundreds and hundreds of machines. Everything's robotized. It's here. It's all over the place. And I don't think we need to worry too much about whether it's coming. It's definitely coming. I think we need to sort of scramble and worry about what we're going to do for the social implications. I'm a big fan of universal basic income and a bunch of the ideas around there. Did a very
deep dive on UBI, and I think that has to become a reality, because it's funny when people say like, oh, it's a market disruption. It's like, but this is one at a scale we've never seen before.
And since we actually just jumped into this with somebody else pretty deeply, I'm curious, how do you think it could work, having a UBI?
Great question. I haven't dug too deep on UBI. I know there's some experiments starting to happen in Stockton, California. There's a larger scale one that's been going on in Scandinavia for a while, and we'd certainly want to look to those programs for a little information. I'm not exactly sure how it should be implemented, but I'm about halfway through an amazing new book that offers kind of a different perspective, a more optimistic jobs will be created perspective, and it's a WTF, What's the Future by Tim O'Reilly.
I like that double meaning.
It's an amazing book, and it's very optimistic and thoughtful. I don't know if you guys know O'Reilly Media. They have the little woodcut lemurs on all their computer books.
The really strung out lemurs, yeah.
Yeah, the huge eyes. Tim is very much a futurist and a deep thinker about how some of the technologies that we're seeing aren't just going to inhabit and change the world that we're living in, but they're fundamentally changing the whole structure of the world. So he lays out a lot of great examples about how the oncoming robot revolution isn't just going to create this sort of dystopia of no jobs, but is going to create all sorts of other jobs and other opportunities. One has to be really optimistic and forward-thinking to really go there, though.
I think it's finding a middle ground, because on one end I'm pessimistic in the sense that I'm a realist, knowing how corporations and profits work, but at the same time I also believe that there is a goodness overall to people, and the hope is that prevails. But I could see it falling somewhere in the middle, and here's hoping that kind of positive view impacts things and can make life better for all of us.
I'm curious. I thought I would get to this earlier, but we ended up going in a lot of different interesting directions. That's how it always goes, I guess. Though, and I always, if I start to think we're going in one direction, then it gets there at the last minute. But with that in mind, I'm curious. With you're giving kids this intuition towards getting into technology and all this stuff. So they're going to be growing up with your product, but they're also going to be growing up with all different kinds of robots. And I think a lot about Japan in this regard, because you kind of have to, because there's a society where there is really no problem. No one seems to really have any problem with bringing robots into the home. They're like, yeah, let it happen. So I'm curious what you think the future is going to look like in 10, 15 years in regards to kids growing up and growing up in a world specifically where it's normal to be around robots. It's normal to be immersed in technology and the internet and information everywhere. And how you think that will shape children as they become adults and the future in general. Just because I have to imagine that comes up sometimes for you and the work that you do.
Yeah, definitely. It's my view that our most pressing problem as a society, as a species, as a civilization is getting a better understanding into complexity. So if we turn on the news, if you turn on most social media, we just see oversimplified explanations for really complicated things. And sometimes abstractions help, sometimes rules of thumb help. If you look back at educational psychology, one of the most important and first phases of kids forming ideas of the world is putting things in boxes. Categorization. That's a horse, that's a cow, that's a man, that's a woman, etc. We put things in little boxes. And after that, I feel like it should be the rest of our life approach to tease out the subtleties in those, to pull things out of boxes, to move to a tagging system instead of a categorization system, etc. We have big problems in the world, big complex problems, ecological problems, political problems, serious social problems in America right now, and we approach them in these good and bad and black and white and red and blue and yes or no type of dichotomies that actually don't help anything at all in general.
It's so frustrating too, because you hear usually most of us fall on one side or the other because we kind of have to some degree, and I really don't care for that. But I think in terms of, not to in any way bring up the gun violence debate or talk about it specifically, but I think that is one issue that it's very clear that on no one side is solving it with an extreme binary set of options. It's just
certainly right. We can put a box on the street corner and we can yell, but to really solve any of these problems, we need to dig many layers deeper and understand all of the complexities and all of the issues that are interacting to create these two sort of polar viewpoints. We can't solve it just by yelling yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, right?
Someday, fingers crossed, someone will yell loud enough and we'll all go deaf and suddenly
fingers crossed.
Solve it. But no, I think that's the interesting aspect too, that approaching it from an angle of almost teasing down to the motivations and finding ways to pull out the roots. But that feels like a John Nash-esque thing where you're going to be starting to run strings everywhere and feel like you're going crazy as you're trying to solve the root between every motivation of why you say something and you don't.
I think a great first step is just understanding that the world is not as simple as we might like to assume that it is.
It's also a little bit scary. And
really
people
scary.
Really do. I try to do that with people, and I'm apparently very bad at it because they're like, no, I don't want to think about that.
Well, it's funny because it is and it isn't. You have two sides of the same coin, because on one end it is incredibly simple where you look at our motivations as just survival. And then on the other end, you can get into the much deeper implications of what connects it from my decision to do X or believe X through my programming all the way back to survival. But it's either you can look at it from a very, very far away, simplified view, or a very close up, specific view. But it's hard to find that middle ground. There was a piece I read once about that were really good about predicting an individual's behavior, and then going to the other side, giant groups of people's behavior. But it's that middle ground that's hard. On one, you can predict, through physics, one single drop of water, you can predict very easily what's going to happen with that. You can know the science behind it, you can track it, you can follow it, know the formulas. And then the other
interactions.
And then the other end, you can follow an entire let's look at the weather patterns. You can follow lots of drops of water. You can predict giant ocean currents and what happens with weather systems. But it's the middle ground of predicting a particular cloud is really hard. So it's interesting that as you look at these data sets on one end or the other, as soon as you get into the middle, it gets much more complicated. It's like that black box effect where you can see, again, the end result or the beginning result, but then the entire middle process is very complex and difficult.
But that also really, I think, is a good argument for the benefits of machine learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, also a lot of this is a good argument for reaching out to kids instead of adults.
I think, that's exactly.
You mentioned kind of giving up on people for being able to really grok things that are beyond the level of simplicity. And if you talk to a gray-haired person who doesn't believe in evolution, nothing you can say will convince them. You can go autopoiesis, you can go scientific explanations. It doesn't matter. Their minds are closed. That's why we're making products for kids.
I think that would be the best invention, being able to, because obviously the way we're wired and built, we're built to die at a certain point, and our life cycles and the way we learn, the way our brains go. But the ability to, open up, just like we're so with like neuroplasticity and the idea of how wired children are to learn language at an early age, and being able to keep not only the ability to learn languages, but also almost that open-mindedness, which is fighting against our biology. We're programmed to be creatures to live in, nomadic tribes in the forest. Society's evolved at a much faster rate than we have. So it's funny that, having to rely on, at a certain point, you've almost lost people when they get to their minds are made up. You can't, like you said, change their minds or educate them in a deeper level. So you have to rely on that next generation to be the better version of ourselves.
Although I think if you want to challenge, I think it is possible to change people's minds no matter how stubborn they seem. It's just, it's such a commitment. I say that only as a somewhat hopeful thing, just looking at me 2 years ago and then 2 years ago beyond that and so on.
See, I think you're a different case though.
I'm a different case because I don't know why I am how I am, but I am I just don't recognize myself every time I feel like I'm shedding my personality like a snake sheds his skin.
That's beautiful.
Every couple, or gross.
That's poetry, Adam.
But like every 2 to 4 years, I'm like, who am I now? And it's a little unsettling, but it reminds me that people are malleable, very much so, and it's like, oh, you can't change anyone, and I don't believe that. I think you can very much change people. It's more of an ethical question than whether or not it's possible, but it is difficult and slow. With some eye clamps and a Clockwork Orange montage, you can change anyone's mind.
Can you, or do you just change yourself, Adam?
I think it would be dangerous for me to get into the specifics, but I've tested a few theories.
Oh dear, those are the screams coming from the basement I hear?
No, they were all for positive reasons. Okay. Just trying to help a couple of people with problems they couldn't seem to get over on their own, and I was like, okay, well, if I were training them to get over it, well, how would that work? And so I did some small things and found that there are a couple of like little emotional tricks you can play, but I feel very uncomfortable doing it. I wanted to know, and I wanted to see if it would be helpful, and I intended to take full responsibility if I was wrong, but fortunately, everything worked out for the best.
For now.
Yeah, but I will never say who I did that to.
That's an ominous note.
Yeah, it's not you. But you probably know that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. Well, that's a creepy place to leave it. Maybe we can say something else.
Yeah, a happy thought to end things on, Eric.
Yeah, Eric. Yeah. What do you got?
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah, how about an optimistic view or something that, optimistic view for the future.
Sorry, I was just distracted, sort of scanning the back of my mind for subliminal messages and things that may have been implanted during this last hour and a half talking with you two fine people. I guess I'll just leave you with kind of a fun notion about what we're doing, in that, don't tell anyone, but Cubelets are really this huge Trojan horse. We don't sell Cubelets to anyone, really, who wants to gain intuitions about complexity and emergence and therefore see the world in a grayer, smarter way than they do now. We sell all of our stuff into schools to teach STEM. science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. People buy Cubelets, educators buy Cubelets because they meet the next generation science standards, and because they meet the ISTE standards, and because they meet all of this sort of very low-level math education requirements that they have in the U.S. What we're really doing is, once that course gets into the school, we're giving kids the ability to build and explore and design their own complex systems and see the world in terms of how it really works, and that things are not as simple as they seem. When we sell Cubelets into, a Bible camp or something like that, I get this huge and wonderful sense of glee in that we're accomplishing our mission and getting to the kids and making them much smarter than their parents are.
Yeah, that is a positive note.
I like it.
So if people want to check out Cubelets, you can go to modrobotics.com. We'll have links to what we've talked about in the show notes, including that. But Eric, is there anywhere you want to direct people outside of the main website to check out what you're doing?
Nope, modrobotics.com is the place to go.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for talking to us today. This was very interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And
thanks for having me, Adam, Tommy. It was a pleasure talking with both of you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Supercharged. If you'd like to send in a comment or a question, you can do so on awkward.email. You just go on your web browser to awkward.email. It's actually a website. And you can call or text 509-AWKWARD instead if you'd like to just skip all of that and do it from your phone. Also, if you'd like to check out some of our other shows, we've got a lot of great shows now, and we're having more every day, or, eventually. You can do that on awkwardhuman.com/podcast. Go check it out. We've got a lot of good stuff, and we hope that you'll be listening every week. Thanks.